Hello, my friends. It's Wednesday, 1 p.m. Pacific time, and I am Mary Rose Wood. I am so glad to be here with you live. We have something to talk about today that I feel has probably happened to most of us writers at one point or another. Let me know if this has ever happened to you. You wrote something. Maybe you wrote a little bit, maybe you wrote a lot. You worked up the courage to show it to someone, which is huge and is to be commended. And of course, you're on tenterhooks waiting for their response, but you think they're going to mostly like it and maybe give you a few, tips about little things that might be improved. And instead, they come back to you with this kind of helpless, I didn't get it, or I really couldn't follow what was happening, or it just didn't make sense. This can be very upsetting. It's disappointing. It's not what we want to hear when we share our writing with somebody. Clearly, something got lost in the translation between what we thought we were putting on the page and what actually ended up on the page. Now, I'm going to tell you right now that my basic premise today is that it's not the reader's fault. Okay? So you've got to be open to understanding that when this happens, it's not the reader's fault. It won't work unless we take responsibility for it, okay? So today I want to talk about why this can happen to writers, why we can get so disconnected from the reader's experience while we are intimately engaged with drafting and revising our own work that we know so well, we can really lose track of what we've actually put on the page for the reader's experience. That's what I want to talk about today. If we can solve this today, it's going to help you a lot with two things. And I just want to point this out to you. Both of these problems are going to be addressed by today's talk. One of them is world building and backstory, how we actually get the information on the page that our reader needs. And the other, and you know me, to me, this is the most important thing, is how we can make sure that our reader actually can follow the plot, how we can make sure that the storytelling is vivid, clear, and engaging to the reader by making sure it's on the page. I also have a bit of a spicy take that I'm going to offer at the end of today's talk, so I hope that you will stick around for that. I'll try to be brief, but I do have a spicy take to conclude with. So I just want to welcome everybody who's here. I just want to wave hi to Hillary, who's already here and in the comments. That's great. The rest of you who are watching live. Some of you know me, some of you don't. If you're new here, or maybe you're just watching the replay, I'm Mary Rose Wood. I am an author. I'm known best for my middle grade fiction, but I've also written screenplays. I've written for the theater. I've done improv. I've written all kinds of things. And I am also the founder of Path of the Storyteller, which is my own platform for teaching and mentoring writers. And it's in that capacity that I go live on Wednesdays at 1 p.m. to talk about story structure, writing craft, and the mindset of the working, thriving writer. I do have a freebie to offer anybody who's new to me, new to Path of the Storyteller. And I want to just make sure I don't forget to tell you about it. It's a collection of writing prompts, and you can get it at this URL, www.pathofthestoryteller.com/challenge. It's 30 writing prompts, and they are designed to lead you through story structure from beginning through the middle to the end. So if you download these prompts and you do them in order, you're going to give yourself a little crash course in story structure, and I highly recommend it. They're lots of fun also, and I've been getting a lot of good feedback from the folks who've been doing them, that they're kind of helpful. So I hope you'll take advantage of that. I'll post the link in the comments below as well, so you can enjoy those. Cynthia's here too. Great to have you here, Cynthia. So this is a live stream, so we'll be getting comments and questions as we go. As you know, I like to weave them into the conversation. So if I'm saying something that you want to share about your own experience, or you want me to answer a particular question, please feel free to leave it in the comments. That's true if you're watching the replay as well. If you leave a comment, I will get notified and I will pop in to answer it. All right, my friends, let's dive into this topic. How do we put the story on the page? How do we get the stuff that we need the reader to know on the page where the reader can see it. It's a really fundamental part of our responsibility. And I want to talk about this word responsibility for just a second. As I hinted in my introduction, here's my premise, and I need you to buy this. The reader's experience is your responsibility. It's the writer's responsibility. If the reader can't follow what you've done, it's your job to fix it. It's your job to examine what you've put on the page and figure out why the reader is struggling so much. All right. Now, there's going to be a couple of reasons, and I'm going to go over them and I'm going to tell you what to do instead. But basically, our reasons are going to fall into two categories. It's either not there on the page at all, meaning that you left it out. What the reader needed, it just wasn't there. It's possible that this happens, right? Or you offered it. It's on the page somehow, somewhere, but in a way that was not visible to or useful to the reader. All right. So that's what the topic of this talk is going to be. We're going to just unravel those kind of two categories of error. Speaking of two categories, I also want to add a little nuance to this talk because your reader needs stuff from you. Your reader needs the information that is going to enable them to follow the story. So information is a category of the stuff that the reader needs from you that needs to be on the page in a way that they can actually notice and make use of information. But the other thing that the reader needs to experience on the page is the storytelling itself. Now, I just want to clarify what that means for anyone who's not super used to hearing me go on and on about storytelling. By the storytelling, I mean the actual trajectory of transformation, not just individual moments where something cool happens, but the ongoing process of the hero of your tale, the protagonist, the central character, pursuing something with intention that it really matters that they get, that's going to take them on a journey of change, a transformation of consciousness, in the words of Joseph Campbell. They're going to be hitting obstacles. They're going to be responding to those obstacles by taking action. They're going to grow and change and learn as a result of these experiences. And they're just going to be different at the end of the story than they are at the beginning. The world of the story will be different at the end than it is at the beginning. And this happens not all at once, not in a flash of light on the last page, but incrementally all through the story. So if the reader is not getting those incremental signals, those incremental pieces of evidence, those experiences of obstacle, reaction, transformation, victory, defeat, all of the stuff that makes a story, then they're not going to be able to follow it either. So it's not just about information that I'm going to speak today. This is not just to talk about weaving in the backstory, although I am going to cover that. It's also about putting the story itself on the page so that the reader can see it. Okay? How do we know what information needs to be included is also related to what information the reader needs to be able to follow the story. So the two topics are so enmeshed, they're so intertwined that I felt that I just needed to talk about both of them at the same time. All right, let's dive in. Where do writers go wrong in this process of putting words on the page in order to communicate a story to the reader? Well, let's start with the easy stuff. By accident, they just leave it out. And this can happen pretty easily. And I'm sure it's happened to all of us at one point. The truth is that by the time we're showing our work to our reader, we've been with it a long time. We know it very well. We know the characters. We know what happens. Chances are we know the history of everything. We know the backstory. And it can be just an omission by accident that we forget to say something. And we do this in real life all the time, right? We'll start telling somebody something, and we'll wonder. Hang on one second. I'm just getting a little message that the folks on Facebook might be having a little trouble right now. If that's the case, I'm on YouTube, so you can just hop on over to the YouTube channel and pop in. All right. I don't know if that was a real error message or just a cautionary tale. But if it turns out that you're having trouble watching on Facebook, just join us over on YouTube. All right, let me start my thought again. In real life, when we're telling people a story, right? We often have this experience of them saying, "Wait a minute, I didn't hear the beginning of this." And then we realize, "Oh, I thought I told you what had happened, but in fact, it was my brother on the phone the other day that I told." And then we find ourselves having to catch up. So this is a human error that we thought we told them and we just forgot. Now, if you're not sure, there's a very practical exercise that you can do where you can just look at the text itself, and see if you can find, like, that children's book, Where's Waldo? I'm sure we all read. If you've been around kids, you've all had a chance to find Waldo in these, complex illustrations in which the little figure of Waldo is hidden. You can take out your little highlighter or use your digital highlighter in your Microsoft Word or whatever word processing program you use, and literally make yourself honest, hold yourself accountable for where exactly on the page you you put the information that the reader needs. Where is it? Is it on page 1? Is it on page 20? Is it scattered in a lot of different places? Have you got Waldo's legs on one page and Waldo's head on another, right? Like, that's not going to work for the reader. And sometimes this happens, right? That we've just left it out by accident, and then we go looking for it and we realize we never put it in. So I strongly recommend that any of the essential information that your reader needs to follow along, that you go back and do a little housekeeping to make sure that you know when things have been offered to the reader. Like, what's the continuity? And, just using the word continuity makes me want to add a little bit of a point about this idea of responsibility. If we were screenwriters or filmmakers, there would be a lot of people helping us make the movie, but there would be a person whose job it was to track the continuity, to make sure that the stuff makes sense. And that's because movies are shot out of order. So the stuff that might be at the end of the movie might, for various technical reasons or logistical reasons, be shot first. And so things like, if there's a male character who's growing a beard over the course of the timeline of the movie, we're going to shoot the end first. Like, his beard has to be the way his beard is at the end, not the way his clean shaven face is going to be at the beginning, right? Like every little detail. Now, when we're novelists, our job is all of it. We are our own continuity editors. And the truth is that we too may invent our story out of order as we draft. And so sometimes it's just very easy to make these kinds of mistakes. So this is very innocent, and you have to be grateful if your reader points it out to you, but it's your job to fix it. Okay. Now, sometimes it's an accident. But I want to also say that sometimes the writer doesn't leave out essential information by accident. They leave out information that's important on purpose. Now, why would a writer do that? Well, writers have all kinds of ideas, right? Some writers will say, I was afraid that I was going to do an info dump, right? That I was over explaining, that I was providing so much backstory that I was going to bore my readers, And so rather than risk the dreaded info dump, they just don't put the information in. And likewise, they might say, I just wanted to plunge the reader into the action. And so they'll write the story that they're telling from a point of view where stuff is already happening. We're in the middle of a vivid scene, and it feels like a lot of is going on. And in the writer's mind, this is a much more engaging way to start to tell the story. And in fact, many writers may have been advised to start telling their story in this way. The problem is that the reader is brand new. Like they just knocked on the door, they came in, they've still got their coat on, they don't know where anything is, right? They're new. They need a little help. Like you've got to take their coat and tell them where to sit and show them where the restroom is. Like you just have to orient them a little bit. Who's the main character? Where are we? What is going on in this scene? Right? And if we don't do that because we're so afraid to step out of the action for fear of boring our reader, we're going to bore our reader because there's nothing for them to hold on to. They can't enter the world of the story. We haven't even given them the basic scaffolding, right? And here's where you have to be careful about what you might believe about these issues of info dumping or starting in the middle of the action. If you think that the solution is then, well, oh, okay, so I want to start in the middle of the action. I don't want to like clog up this great action scene with all this information that the reader needs to be able to follow it. I know. I'll insert a prologue. No. I'm just giving you a no on this one. That's not the solution. Or the writer might say, well, it's so enthralling. There's so much going on. I'm sure the reader will be fine. But in chapter 2, I'm going to explain everything. That's not going to work either. So I want you to think, right, how we do this in real life. If I tell you something like, I don't know, I went to a restaurant and I met up with a friend and we had a big fight, and I tell it to you like that, I'm quite likely to say, the other day I went to a restaurant. You know the one, the Mexican place, on Main Street that's got the big, statue of the cowboy in front. Fine. All right. So I met with my friend so and so. Yeah, I went to college with her. You've never met her. Blah blah blah. Like I'm going to start to tell you the story quite naturally, weaving in the facts that bring it to life. Most of us in real life are pretty competent storytellers. We don't hesitate to weave in the information that we need to make our story effective. But writers are sometimes afraid to do this in their writing. And I would be curious to know if any of you out there have been like excessively cautioned against putting in exposition during a scene or weaving in information for fear of slowing down the action. The truth is, you can weave in all the information that your reader needs to follow the scene that you're in without bogging down the scene. And that's the solution. All right. Now, one of the things that you might have discovered is that you might be a writer who tends to over-explain, to put in more information than is strictly necessary. And perhaps you've gotten this feedback and now you're overcompensating by not putting in any. You have to trust your discernment. You have to trust your ability to say, wait a minute, what does the reader need to know to understand what's going on right now? Not what's going to go on later, what's going on right now. And I can just weave that much in and then get on with it. And of course, our great patron saint of how to weave in backstory, of course, is Tolkien, who manages to start The Hobbit, which was, the reading public's introduction to Middle Earth, with this very explanation. Like, he starts the book saying, in a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit. He explains a little bit about this particular hole in the ground in which a hobbit lives. And then he says, wait a minute, you probably don't know what a hobbit is. Let me explain. Boop, boop. That's enough to get on with. Back to the story. All of this happens so swiftly. It just goes down like ice cream. There's nobody who's going to mind it. And you can do that too. All right. What the reader needs to know is all you need to include, and you can weave it into the scene. All right. So that is one of the things that writers do. They either leave the information out by accident, easy to fix, or they leave it out on purpose because their thinking about this is a little muddled. So I hope I've just, helped unmuddle your thinking about it. You can weave in the very information that you need as you need it, not in a prologue, not in a chapter that's coming 20 pages down the pike, right then, as the reader needs it. All right. And speaking of as the readers need it, here's the second thing that I want to talk about in terms of how writers can go wrong with adding story and information on the page. They do include it. But they put it in the wrong place. Now, I want to emphasize what I hope all of you know about storytelling, which is that sequence matters. A story is a journey of change. So that implies something kind of linear, right? It implies that there's a point on the timeline in which our hero and the world that the hero inhabits is a certain way. And that there's another point on the timeline later on as a consequence of the story that is about to unfold, where both the hero and the world they inhabit have changed, have gone through something, right? This is just the very definition of a story. And so what happens before and what happens next and what happens as a consequence of what just happened and how it all ends is baked into the whole form of storytelling. Therefore, sequence matters because things are happening not at random, but because of one another, right? What happens now is a consequence of what has already happened. Beginning, middle, and end. Now, I want to share, of course, that I just saw an absolutely wonderful film. It's one of the Academy Award nominated films this year called Everything Everywhere All at Once, whose very title kind of pokes a little fun at, if you will, the idea of sequence. And the premise of that movie, which is just a wonderful sci-fi romp, I highly recommend it, is that everything is happening everywhere all at once. And that's just a great sci-fi idea. It's so meta. It's so interesting. But the movie itself is completely linear, right? Because it's how we experience life. A character may go on a journey in which she discovers that everything is happening simultaneously everywhere all at once. But then as a consequence of that discovery, she's changed. And we have a very satisfying ending. The world has changed, the relationships are changed, the character herself is changed, right? Story is story, even if we feel that we're writing something kind of cool and meta and nonlinear and whatever, some writers get, a little bit cerebral about this stuff. But we do have to be super aware of sequence because the reader reads the book in sequence. The reader doesn't read every page everywhere all at once. The reader reads, let me make this explicitly clear. The reader reads the book from start to finish, from left to right, word by word, from top to bottom. And the precision of this becomes very clear. The importance of the precision of this becomes very clear when you really start to dig into what's going on in the reader's mind as they read what we've given them. Because a word that appears at the end of the paragraph is of no use to the reader until they get to that word. And if the comprehension of that paragraph rests upon that word, you just have to remember that for that whole paragraph, your reader is in a state of kind of suspended animation, waiting to find out what is being said to them. This is true on the tiniest level. Sometimes even 2 or 3 words in the wrong order can be so much more difficult for the reader to follow than just putting them in the right order so that the reader gets what's happening in the order in which they're going to be able to make sense of it. So there's actually all kinds of rules of rhetoric, about creating great sentences and putting subjects before verbs and all that stuff. And I'm not going to nerd out about all this because my focus is on storytelling. Just know that because the reader is locked into a sequential experience of, reading from page one to the last page, the sequence in which you present every piece of information, large, medium, or small, matters a great deal. So you can offer information in the wrong place. You can offer it too early, or you can offer it too late. All right. Now, why do writers do this? Well, it's similarly to what I was saying earlier. If you're unsure how to weave in the information that is needed when it's needed, you may find yourself feeling like you've either got to pregame an important scene by offering some kind of big explanatory preface or chunk of stuff in the beginning so that the reader in your mind will understand what happens later, or you'll write a scene and then realize that there's a lot that was left out of it, and then you'll follow it up with a chunk of really expository backstory, or a conversation. Often writers will think, oh, I'll just have the two characters talk about it or something, and then try to clarify what just happened by having a post conversation. None of this is helpful to the reader, right? You just have to trust your discernment and weave it in. Now, I want to give you a couple of tips about how to weave it in so that it's not too early or too late. You can simply use narration. Please trust that fiction works, right? Fiction includes this premise of a point of view, a narrative voice. And it might be a third person narrative voice, or it might be a first person narrative voice. It doesn't matter. The narrative voice itself can weave in information as adroitly as me telling you over the phone, like, yes, I went to that restaurant, the one, we went there last summer. It's got a, it serves those special margaritas. Yes, that's where we went. You just can weave it in and they get on with the story, as Tolkien says. You can do that. You can use dialogue to weave in information. And I often recommend this to my students as a way of weaving in information that's really important, because our readers love dialogue and they are likely to pay attention to it, a little extra attention to it, even if they've zoned out a little bit. If the characters start talking on the page, the reader goes, oh, a conversation. Let me dig into this. It's a great place to weave in important information. And another way that I think is sometimes underappreciated is by including physical details, right, that have information in them, whether it's meaningful objects that have a history to the character, um, something about what they're wearing that might indicate where they've been or what their expectation was for this scene. If I tell you a story about showing up at a coffee shop to meet an old friend, and I show up fresh from the gym in my my workout clothes because I think it's a casual meeting, and he shows up with a tie on and looking really good, and I'm like, oh, wait a minute, you thought this was something different than what I thought it was, right? So even this kind of close physical observation and including of details can communicate information. So that's a really great thing to think about. Now, so weaving in, the skill of weaving in and knowing what to leave out is essential. Here's another reason why information can end up in the wrong place. And I think this is probably pretty common. It's because of the way we work. It's because of our process. We are often discovering things as we draft. It depends what your process is. If you are, as some writers are, meticulous outliner, and you've worked out all your backstory and your character histories and the plot and everything beforehand, this might not apply to you. But in my experience, that's not most writers. Most writers have some sort of idea of where they want to go, but there's a constant flow of discovery as they draft. And so many of the things that the writer discovers as they draft get discovered along the way. And so by the end of a draft, the quantity of information, the level of detail that the writer has at his or her disposal is much greater than it was in the beginning of the book. So now that they've invented it all, they're like, well, it's all in there. But as you can see, the really good information is going to be later on, because it's the stuff that the writer came up with when they were intimately involved with the world of the story, when they had been working on it a long time, when they've been, really had just gone in deep and had the nuance and a sense of even what kind of stuff is important. So the stuff gets invented in the second half of the book, but you know what? We might need to know some of it in the first half, right? So the further you get in the draft, the more stuff you figured out. And so the information just ends up being scattered like pearls throughout, as opposed to being deployed strategically for the reader's benefit. Now, I just want to say that our unrevised drafts, in my opinion, are not for the reader. They're not for any reader. Our truly unrevised raw drafts are process documents for us. It's not terribly helpful to have other people read them, because we haven't actually done them yet. We've explored, we've gathered our materials, but it's not until we've taken a pretty good look at what we've gotten and revised it to put it in order, to actually make it tell the story that we wanted it to tell, using all the great discoveries we made while we're drafting, that it can sort of even hope to make sense to somebody else. So if you're in a critique group, or you have critique partners, beta readers, people that you trust to read your drafts, however imperfect they may be, you may find that it's counterproductive to give them stuff that hasn't been worked on, at least to some extent. You need some revision in order to discover your intention enough to put it on the page and then give it to someone else, right? Our unrevised drafts are not for readers. That is my philosophy. Feel free to argue with me. You can fight with me about it. There's a phrase that I use in the Path of the Storyteller community a lot, which is that we write our drafts panning for gold, that we're basically, sort of standing in the mud of creativity, right? We've got our trousers rolled up to the knee, the water's rushing around our boots, and we're holding a little sieve, and we're just looking for stuff. And most of what we're going to find is going to be mud. That's fine. But every now and then we're going to see something in the mud that glinting, and we'll say, aha, that's gold. That's I need. That I'm going to keep. That I can use. And that can be any kind of gold that we're going to find useful in the crafting of our story. We're going to save the gold. We're going to, put it in a special place. But just because we found the nuggets of gold and left them by the side of the stream, it doesn't mean that anybody else can make sense of it. We then have to take that, and deploy it in our revision with intention. All right. So go find those gold nuggets and revise your draft so it makes sense. Now, how do you know when? If I keep saying, just don't put it too early, don't put it too late, how do you know when to put it in? And it really is this question of learning to anticipate what the reader's experience is. You just have to be very strict with yourself and read what you've got in order, and just really imagine yourself only knowing what you're learning as you proceed in sequence. And when you get to the point where you realize that the reader won't know what this is, or the reader won't understand the significance of this event, or by now the reader's probably wondering where we are because I haven't actually created the setting yet and I've been writing for 3 pages. It's like we're disembodied voices on the page. You've got to put that stuff in, not a beat after the reader asks the questions, but if you can anticipate, like just a half a beat before, they're going to wonder. What you've done is you've created a seamless experience for them. If you put it in just as they're going to start to need to know it, you're gold. All right. Now, this has been a lot about information. All right. And I want to pivot a little bit now and talk about this topic of storytelling on the page. If a writer is writing drafts in which the reader is having a hard time following the story, it may be because the writer themselves have not sorted out which words they are using to actually put the story itself on the page. And so we have to ask this question, like, what does story look like on the page? Story includes, a hero who's got some unsustainable quality about their existence, some need to go on a journey of transformation, right? They have to need the story to happen in order for it to happen. And we see that this unsustainable world just topples and change becomes urgent, and some opportunity to do something important that the hero maybe has never done before, never thought they would be capable of doing, is presented. They might find it daunting. Chances are they will find it daunting and have to go through a process of debate as they refuse at first what it is, or maybe the world of the story will provide some obstacle to it, just to really make it quite a big moment when the hero finally can accept this adventure. And there may be an important intervention from a mentor figure to make this happen. I'm just describing like the typical types of scenes we would find in the first act of a story. And the second act of the story is going to be depicting the hero actually pursuing this goal. There may be secondary characters that play an important role. Think of the Tin Man, the Cowardly Lion, and the Scarecrow accompanying the hero Dorothy as she goes on her path to her goal, which is to go find this wizard and ask him to send her home to Kansas. Her mission's really clear in that story, right? So there may be fellow travelers. There's going to be obstacle after obstacle, and each time our hero is going to have to kind of come up to their edge of what they're capable of, meet it and exceed it a little bit. And these are the incremental steps of change and transformation. There's lots more to story structure. And once again, please avail yourself of those writing prompts, because they're going to give you a lot of ideas about what types of scenes actually move the story forward, what types of questions you as a writer should ask yourself in order to develop not just words on a page, but scenes that are filled with story. So if a writer doesn't know what kind of scenes actually comprise a story, they may just not know what to emphasize. They may not know which are the key sentences, which are the key words, which are the key things happening that they've got to put forward so that the reader can see them. And this is a kind of a common problem when writers are developing. And one of the things that we do in the Path of the Storyteller program, one of the ways that in which the program is structured, in fact, is that we go through all of the different types of scenes that comprise a well-structured story, and we practice writing them. We practice them in ways silly. We practice them in little short ways. We practice them in longer ways. But we actually look at for example, what does it look like on the page for a hero who is uncertain to be encountering a mentor figure and have that encounter change how they feel, enable them to move forward with a fresh sense of understanding or a fresh willingness to take the adventure. That is a scene that is going to happen in so many stories that you write. It's a scene that happens in so many stories that you know. If you practice writing those scenes, you're going to get good at them, right? You're going to explore all the different things that can happen in a scene like that. A scene like that is pure storytelling. I want that scene in your narrative, But if you don't know that those are the kinds of scenes that you should be writing, then your storytelling impulses are going to be a little mushy. And you're going to be pushing your story forward just kind of with brute force, as opposed to just deploying real effective storytelling techniques. And the reader is not going to be able to follow it because it's not going to offer them the things that they recognize as story. So this is a pretty common thing. If the reader can't follow it, and it's not a question of there not being enough information on the page, it's possible that the storytelling itself is buried. And this is the next thing I want to talk about. The storytelling and the essential information may be there, but they are buried under clutter. Think of a messy, 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 messy desk. I hope you don't have one. Mine isn't so bad at the moment. There may be some really important stuff on that desk, but if it's heaped with junk mail, unimportant things, post-it notes that no longer mean anything to you, coffee cups that need to be put away, right? You're not going to be able to see what's important. And so, just as we talk about making sure that the information and the storytelling gets on the page, we also talk about that it must be on the page so that the reader can see it. So it's not enough for it to be there. It has to be visible. It has to be unmistakably visible. So if it's buried in clutter, it won't be unmistakably visible to the reader. This is when writers can sometimes get a little confused and even defensive about, I don't know why the reader's so confused. It's all there. And the problem is that they're right. It's all there. The story, the information, and also a ton of clutter. Things that are neither storytelling nor essential information. That's what I mean by clutter. Extra stuff. I just want to give a little rundown of what that might look like on the page. What's extra stuff? First of all, because we're writers and our material is language, needless words of all kinds constitute clutter. I like to teach my writers to compress their prose, to be very diligent about not using 10 words when 5 words will do. And there's a reason for this, right? The reason is that if you clutter the page with stuff that's just not that important, the important stuff gets buried. And so we have to be able to know what's important and what isn't. And then we have to be willing to reduce the clutter. So needless words of all kinds. That means, a page and a half of description of something that could be handled in a paragraph. It could be a conversation that starts with 2 characters chatting about things that the reader already knows for half a page and then getting to what's new or interesting about this conversation, right? It could be a scene that includes the hero waking up in the morning, brushing her teeth, getting down to breakfast, and then, only then on page 4, seeing her father walk through the kitchen with an axe and turning to her mother and saying, "Where's Papa going with that axe?" We actually don't need to see the waking up, the shedding of the pajamas, the brushing of the teeth, the trip to the kitchen. We don't need to see it because the storytelling starts with "Where's Papa going with that axe?" And if anybody doesn't know, that is, of course, the opening of Charlotte's Web, right? Those are all qualify as needless words. So you've got to take out the clutter so that the reader can see the story. All right. Another thing that can serve as clutter is needless complexity. And what I mean by needless complexity is a writer who just doesn't trust that one hero on one main plot, with one meaningful journey of transformation is enough to interest the reader. And so there are subplots and subplots and subplots and more subplots. There are characters who come and go, characters who arrive and we never see again, characters who show up at the beginning and don't show up again until the end. They just are not necessary. They're just not really contributing, right? And it's just needless. It's needless complexity, right? And I do know that it's pretty common for writers to mistake complexity for sophistication, to mistrust simplicity and clarity. And I just want to tell you, remember that the reader is new to your book. You have been working on it for 2 years, but the reader just got here. So what seems completely obvious to you is probably just almost clear enough for your reader. We really have to train ourselves to think that way. All right. One of the last things that I want to share that is could constitute a form of clutter is a clutter of distance. If we tell our story from such a distant point of view and we never really enter the experience of our main character fully and intimately, if we never really get close to what's going on, if we write our book from this kind of observing position, that distance to me is also a form of clutter, in the sense that it's like throwing a blanket over the storytelling. If the hero's journey of transformation is what the readers come for, and trust me, it is, if we never let them fully intimately experience that by sort of putting them inside our hero's experience, then we've muffled the storytelling so much that they're just not going to be able to follow it. It's too far away. It's like trying to follow the plot of a play, if you don't have opera glasses and you're sitting in the back row of the theater and they just look like little ants on the stage and you can't hear them. Like, you're not going to be able to follow it. It's happening, but you're just too far away to get it. Okay, so that's another thing. Now, I mentioned earlier, and I'm almost at my spicy take. We're almost going to wrap up with that, so hang with me for another minute. I mentioned earlier that in the Path of the Storyteller program, we actually practice writing the scenes that tell story, and it's a big undertaking to learn to tell story well. And we go into it pretty deep in the program, and we spend a lot of time doing it. We practice these types of scenes. And I just want to say that um, it's not that they are like icing on the cake. It's not that these powerful scenes of storytelling are like decorative or something that we insert periodically to keep the reader interested. They are both cake and icing. They are it. They are the whole experience, right? And to me, the mark of a writer who's really got a handle on how to tell story, how to put story on the page so that the reader can not only see it, but can't mistake it, get swept away by it, is that the writing on the page only tells story. The writer has been able to achieve a level of discernment about what's necessary for the story and what isn't, and everything that's not necessary has been taken out. So think of being a reader and opening a book that's written at that level of craft, right? It's evident from the first sentence that in this particular book that the reader is beginning, every word is important. Every word delivers some kind of fresh charge, new information, story development, character insight. That is so engaging that this reader is going to be drawn in, and they're going to pay attention at a heightened level to everything because you have demonstrated that every word matters. If you demonstrate to your reader that every 10th word matters, they're not going to pay that close attention to any of them. All right. It's just too much work. So just know that the more you discipline yourself to only put story on the page, you're not taking anything away from the reader by doing that. In fact, you're creating a much improved experience for them, and they will hang on your every word because you've given them reason to. All right. So that's that. That's what it means to put story on the page. Now, a little spicy take. When I was thinking about this talk and about encouraging all of you to take responsibility for the reader's experience by putting yourself in their shoes, by imagining what they need to know, by imagining what they don't yet know, by putting yourself in charge of the sequence of events, it made me remember that writers are often told, in fact, people really try to convince writers that writers are not able to do this, that no writer can be objective about their own work, and that we can only really, get the truth of what we put on the page by letting other people tell us what we've written. I really push back against this. It is true that writers need to improve their craft. They need training. They need to work at mastery. Everything that we do that we want to be really good at, requires an investment of time and training, practice, and effort. And we will, if we stick with it, we can attain mastery. That's how it's done. All right. And part of attaining mastery as a writer is the ability to put ourselves in our reader's experience and anticipate what it's going to be. That is in fact what we're creating when we revise, particularly, is we're crafting an experience for our reader. And if we don't believe that we have the ability to see our work that clearly, then it's like we're abdicating one of the crucial elements of our job. Is it true that copy editors will come in and proofreaders will come in and find mistakes that we missed? Yes, of course. It takes a village to get a book out the door in publishable form. But I'm not talking about finding typos, right? I'm not talking about that. It's your responsibility to revise your book. And the whole process of revision is based on making your book reader friendly, ready for the reader. That's what you're doing when you revise. So don't give up the ship on that. Don't take that so literally that, well, I wrote it and therefore other people are going to have to tell me what's wrong with it because I can't be objective about my work because no writer can be. It is, and here's the spicy part. Maybe that was already a little spicy, but I've heard this kind of thinking from writers, and so I just want to debunk it if I can. It is an amateur's fantasy that we can hand over our very intuitively written drafts that are not that have not been put through any kind of disciplined, rigorous process of revision, and that we can hand them over to editors and that they're going to actually excavate a book out of our drafts. It's so mistaken. And I just hear this a lot. I hear this a lot nowadays from writers because it's so easy to like hire an editor, right? You can go on Fiverr and hire an editor. You can hire someone to do this. It's like it's your job to take your gold nuggets and fashion a book out of them. Yes, good editing can help you. Good, proofreading can help you. But you've got to do your piece of it, all right? And it's equally an amateur's fantasy that when we write stuff intuitively, without thinking of the reader, that what we've got on the page is the purest expression of our voice and vision. And that anything we do after that, in order to make it more friendly to the reader, is somehow diluting our voice and vision. I have to say that the opposite of this is true. If you just want to write for therapeutic reasons and you're writing for your own pleasure, that's fine. It can be very, very important. I'm a big fan of people journaling and having a kind of a private conversation with themselves in writing. It's a hugely clarifying exercise. Lots of people recommend it, right? But when we set out to create works of art, particularly works of fiction, and we have a goal of being published, by which I mean that we want readers. We're writing something in order to connect with readers. We have to bring them into the equation, right? We're storytellers. We're storytellers. We're part of the human enterprise. We're very important, Humans need storytellers. Human society needs storytellers. So we have a role to play. It's not selfish. We have work to do in the world. We want to write stories that make a difference in the world. And a well-told story is going to make a difference to your readers. It is going to make a difference to your readers. It absolutely will. So we're not just writing, into the void here. It's all about communication. Writing for the reader is the whole point. And this is not the same as, writing to market or chasing trends or dumbing it down or anything like that. That's not what I'm talking about. Your reader is your reader, right? You get to write for your ideal reader. And your work is not finished until it works for your ideal reader. And I want you to take responsibility for that. I really do. Okay. So, my friends, I hope that this has been, here we go. I just brought accidentally by clicking a comment up from Jaren. So we'll talk about it in a second, Jaren. I want to go back and see all the comments. So I hope this has been an interesting talk for you. I hope that it gives you a little sense of what to put and not put on the page, how you might think about the sequence of what you're writing, how you might bear your reader in mind as you work. And I'm just going to invite anybody who's got to sign off to just remember that you can go get that downloadable if you haven't already gotten it. The collection of writing prompts is there for you. And I look forward to seeing you next time. I'm here live on Wednesday at 1 p.m. Pacific time. Now, let's just take a look at the comments here. Really fun. Here, Jaron is here. I'm so glad you were here, Jaron. Jaron also is a screenwriter, and he agrees that it is his job to be the continuity person. Well, you know what, Jaron? That's terrific. The more you can bring that discipline to bear in your screenwriting, the better your scripts will be. And then what happens when your movie gets made, which I'm rooting for it to get made, is that all of the physical aspects of the continuity are also going to have to get monitored during production, right? The costumes, the props. Jaron, I don't know if you're a Game of Thrones fan, but there was that very funny incident where one of the actors brought like a Starbucks coffee cup or something like a Starbucks coffee cup onto the set, and it accidentally ended up in a shot. There's a lot of things that happen when something is shot that are far outside the screenwriter's control. But tracking the continuity of the narrative itself is definitely something you can strive for. Waving hello to Nancy, who finally made it, and that's great. All right, terrific, guys. Thanks for being here, and I look forward to seeing you next time. And until I do, happy writing.